Hi everyone, welcome to another real world AWS cloud architecture video with Rahul. In this video, we are going to look at end-to-end AWS solution architecture and look at various scenarios that might be asked in AWS certification or interview questions. It's a architecture for three-tier web application. Okay, so let's get started. Now here I've designed a three-tier web application with more than 30 AWS services. Let's assume that most of these services like S3, ALB, EC2 instances are in the Mumbai region, but the users are global. Now let's assume a user is trying to access www.amazon.com or www.rahul.com. So he hits the browser with this URL. Then his internet service provider resolver is going to request the root domain and get the DNS server for .com TLD, which would route it to the DNS server for www.rahul.com. But to have that DNS server, you will need to use Route 53. So in Route 53, what you can do is you can create a hosted zone and for say rahul.com or amazon.com. Once you have created that hosted zone, then within that hosted zone, you will need to create various records. Say if you are trying to access blog.rahul.com, then you will need to map that IP of that web server to blog.rahul.com, and which you can do in a hosted zone using an A record. Similarly, say if you want to access www.rahul.com, which will be mapped to a different web server. So you'll need to create another host A record with that IP address. Similarly, you can create an alias record, which is for mostly for AWS services like ALB or CloudFront, etc. You can also have multiple routing policies. So you can have a simple routing policy. Simple routing policies means you can have two IPs, and then for www.rahul.com, it will return two IPs in a round robin fashion. Similarly, you can have based on geolocation, failover, latency, so on and so forth. Now let's assume a scenario where the requirement for the application is that it should be global. There are latency issues for upload and download. Let's look at a scenario on how we are going to be able to tackle uh, the download scenario for global users. So that's where the service called CloudFront comes into play. So the request will go from Route 53, maybe through WAF, it's an optional service, to CloudFront, and then CloudFront can route the requests either to a static origin or dynamic origin. But the best thing about CloudFront is that it's a kind of a cache. It's a regional cache. So if the users are in Europe, it will retrieve the static content from this S3 bucket, which is in Mumbai region, and cache it locally within the Europe region. Or if it's in US, wherever globally, wherever it is, it will cache locally. And the static content could be video files, images, etc. And that can considerably speed up on how the users retrieve the content from that site. So one thing you need to make sure is that static content that you have in the origin like S3 bucket, you need to make sure that users are now not directly able to access this S3 bucket. So for that, you can create an OAI, Origin Access Identity. It's like an IAM role which allows only CloudFront to access the S3. The reason we have is if users directly access the S3, then there will be latency, so there is no point in having the CloudFront. The second thing that you can do is uh, if there is dynamic content, that will be automatically routed by CloudFront to the application load balancer. So how you can protect your origin for application load balancer is by adding custom headers. So if you select that option, it will automatically add those custom headers, which can then be validated by the ALB. The second thing we need to look at from the CloudFront perspective is the cache control. So you don't want to send stale content to the users. So you can do it in two ways. Usually it should be less than 5 minutes. You can use the TTL, which allows CloudFront to automatically invalidate the cache, or you can use cache control maxage, which can be done at the origin side. Finally, you can also have Lambda at the edge, which allows you authentication at CloudFront itself. Say you want to authenticate users using Cognito. So that can be done by Lambda at the edge. Similarly, request routing based on dynamic static content, that can be done by Lambda at the CloudFront itself. So you don't need to make a request back to your origin server. You can do it at the CloudFront level or the regional cache itself. Now that is for the download. Now let's look at how we can avoid latency for upload. So if you have to upload, then you have two options. You can use the S3 transfer acceleration. What S3 transfer acceleration helps you with is that once you hit a regional cache, then you can use the AWS network for rest of the distance that is traversed. So it's going to be much faster. And if you have much larger files that you need to upload, you can use multi-part upload. So if it's greater than 100 MB, then you can use multi-part upload. Now you can see here that the requests are to CloudFront is routing the requests through something called as AWS WAF, and then it goes to CloudFront. So what AWS WAF does is it can be enabled for CloudFront, ALB, and as well as API gateway. So what WAF does is it is there to do some geo block. So you might know that certain countries are sending bad requests. So you can enter those geolocation IPs and block the users from that particular region. Then there are also some known malicious IPs that you can get a list from third party, or AWS can provide you some where you can block the request from those users. Similarly, it can also protect you from cross-site scripting, SQL injection. It's a paid service, and then you need to enable it for whichever services you want it to be enabled. Now, the other security services that you can use here is AWS Shield. AWS Shield is something that comes by default. You don't need to pay for it. It's basically for DDoS protection at layer 3 and 4. It can help you prevent, protection against SYD floods and some other things. The third service that you can see here is the AWS Advanced Shield. So it's again a paid service, and to use AWS Advanced Shield is mainly for preventing the sophisticated DDoS attacks. It can it The AWS enables a DDoS response team. So if you are undergoing a DDoS attack, it will assemble its DDoS response team, and which is going to help you. It is also going to protect you against um, any charges that you incur due to the DDoS attack. So there's a financial protection, but it's a fairly expensive service if you want to enable it. Okay, so this was for the part one. I will discuss the compute and database in the part two, and then probably the rest of the services that we have here in the bottom in the part three. Thank you very much.